Hello, I'm Emma Whipday and I'm the author of Shakespeare's Sister, and I'm going to tell you 3 things I've learned about playwriting from William Shakespeare. The first thing I learned about playwriting from William Shakespeare is to write what you know. It's an advice that a lot of young playwrights get given, and I think it's something that Shakespeare certainly believed in. His plays are filled with incredibly specific detail that could only come from in-depth knowledge of a subject. For example, whenever he writes about the world of law, he brings it to life with really specific legal language that makes some scholars think that he must have worked for a lawyer at some point, because how else could he have immersed himself in this kind of detail? People say similar things about he must have gone to sea at some point, he must have been a soldier at some point, because how else could he know these things? But the biographical records don't necessarily suggest that these things happened. So it's simply that Shakespeare was so immersed in the detail of what the world he was creating that even when his plays were about far-flung lands and long ago, he still managed to bring those worlds to life through rooting them and grounding them in that kind of particularity. And that's what I've tried to do in Shakespeare's Sister, because I lecture on Shakespeare and on that world. I really wanted to bring the vanished world of Elizabethan England to life using my research, and so I tried to create those really tiny details that would evoke the lost and vanished world and make you feel as if you were in Elizabethan England, even though I can't know exactly what it was like. So in attempting to really research something and make something feel real, even when I haven't experienced it myself, I was trying to learn from Shakespeare. The second thing I've learned from William Shakespeare is write what you don't know. I know I've just said you should write what you know because you should research a subject so that you get a sense of the particularities of the world you're creating, and that is what Shakespeare did. But he also then used his imagination to take him to far-flung places and long-ago places he could never have experienced. And sometimes he didn't let the details hold him back. When he writes about landlocked Bohemia, he gives it a sea coast. And that shows that he was willing to let his imagination take him to places he knew nothing about, but still root those plays in his experience of small details of life and of human emotions. And that's what I wanted to do in Shakespeare's Sister. I've created a world that I can never visit, that I can never be sure whether it's accurate, and I created a world where I haven't stuck to what we know to be historical reality. I've created a counterfactual history where Shakespeare's sister becomes a playwright and runs away to London. And in doing that, I've tried to follow in Shakespeare's footsteps, where he takes the details of a world and creates it so that it has that richness and sense of reality, but then he lets his imagination take him somewhere impossible or far away. And that's what I've tried to do in creating an Elizabethan London where a woman could be a professional playwright, or at least try to be. The third thing I've learned about playwriting from William Shakespeare is to not be afraid to borrow, and borrow is putting it generously. Some people would say that Shakespeare stole unashamedly. In fact, he's famous for the amount he stole from other writers, both contemporary and classical. He borrowed stories and plots, little details, character names, and he wasn't afraid to set his imagination in a world that someone else had already created, whether a mythical world or a world of the past. And I've tried to follow his example in taking Virginia Woolf's idea of Shakespeare's sister, who's so talented that she runs away to London to join the players, but then reimagining it. Because when Shakespeare borrowed or stole from other writers, he then transformed the stories and made them his own, and that's what I've tried to do in Shakespeare's Sister. Virginia Woolf created a version of Shakespeare's Sister where she runs away to London to join the players, but no one will join with her to help her stage her play, and she ends up falling pregnant and then she ends up dying, and it's a tragic tale. I didn't want mine to necessarily be a happy ever after tale, but I didn't want to portray a world where a woman who wants to write plays is always isolated. I wanted to suggest that there may have been more than one man in Elizabethan London willing to help Judith Shakespeare stage her plays, and more than one woman willing to join with her to stage them. And so that's what I tried to do in reimagining and reinventing Woolf's story, and that's what Shakespeare did with the stories that he stole.